we're back in the shop, but this is not a project video. I wanted to make this video just really quick to talk about the process that I use to manage the footage that I create when I'm making a project video. That is how I handle the footage that going from camera to the computer and editing and things like that. And the reason for that is because in the last month, maybe two, I've heard of at least 2 creators that have lost footage due to hard drive failure or other mishap. The heartbreaking thing is that it's largely preventable. Can't prevent every scenario that would result in losing footage, but you can prevent a lot of them. So I just made this video as a quick overview of how I manage my footage. It's by no means the only way to do things. It's by no means perfect, but I'm hoping that it'll at least get you thinking about your own process and hopefully get you to start backing things up. And backing things up is part of establishing a process. Anyway, I do hope you enjoy the video, and I hope that you can that you find it informative. So thanks for watching.
Okay, so I'm going to go over how I manage my footage. And I'm not saying that this is the only way to do things or it's the best way. This is just what I do, and what I want you to take away from this is that having a process in place and being organized can help mitigate the loss of footage or other data, and also backing up. Now, I'm on Windows and I use Premiere to edit, and I have a particular hardware setup, but that doesn't matter because this is just a process that can be modified and adapted to any situation. The takeaway here is to establish a process, be organized, and back up. First, you'll note that I have 4 hard drives in my computer. I am working on a desktop. I have the operating system drive, the render drive, the working drive, and the backup drive. With the exception of the backup drive, all the drives are solid-state drives that are physically in the computer. The backup drive is an external USB drive. I use the working drive to store all the footage and other assets for any current project. That's where I edit from. Footage is copied from the SD card to that drive. The render drive is where I render a project out to, and the backup drive is for backups. One thing I'll note about using SSDs or solid-state drives. Solid-state drives are not a guarantee against drive failure. SSDs can and they do fail, and I've seen it happen. Their failure modes may be different than traditional spinning disks, but they do fail. So don't rely on using an SSD as your backup or redundancy or what have you. Okay, so here's my process. I have an SD card with some footage on it. And let's just say it's the end of the day, or at least I'm done shooting video for the day, so I want to copy the day's footage from the SD card to the computer. And we'll assume that this is the first set of footage from this project. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my folder structure. So I'm going to go in the working drive, and this is let's just say this is some footage from my shop improvements project. So I'm going to make a folder, and I'm just going to call it shop, or you can shop improvements or whatever you want. And let's just say that this is part 1, because I know I'm going to make multiple parts. So I'm going to name this folder part 1. And within that folder, and again, this gets kind of maybe obnoxious for some people, but again, it's just keeping things organized. Inside the part 1 folder, maybe I know that I'm going to shoot over multiple days. This isn't the last day, so I just, again, to keep things organized, I'm going to make the day 1 folder. And then within that folder, I'm going to create another folder. I only have camera A footage, so I'm going to make Cam A. Now I use my Canon camcorder, that's Cam A. My GoPro, I refer to as Cam B. If I use my phone, that would be Cam C, and so on and so forth. You can name them whatever you want. It's completely arbitrary. But I have footage from Cam A. So then inside that folder, I'm going to open another window here. So I've got my folder structure over here. This is my working drive. I'm going to go over to the SD card. I'm going to find my footage, and I'm going to copy the footage over to the working drive. Okay, so my footage is copied from the SD card to the drive on my computer that I'll be working with it from. At this point, if I had other footage, say from cam B, I'd create the folder and I would copy the footage over. Or if I had other assets, say audio from an external recorder, I would make a folder for that, and I would copy those files over as well. Typically, if I don't have something right away, I'll just make those folders up and copy the stuff over as I generate that media. Okay, so my footage is currently in two places. It's still on the SD card, and it's also on the working drive on my computer. At this point, assuming I have enough SD cards to do this with, I could take the SD card out, maybe label it and set it aside and not use it for the duration of the project until I was absolutely sure I didn't need that footage anymore. And this would give me one backup of the original footage. I typically don't do this unless the footage is particularly important, so I normally take the SD card out of the computer and put it back in the case so I can use it again. Now, one thing that's important to note is that for me, if an SD card is in the storage case, I assume it's ready to be used. An SD card in the case has already had its contents copied and it's safe to use. The reason this is important to note is that before recording to an SD card, I always format or initialize the card in the camera it's being used in. This is to ensure that the SD card has its space freed up and also so it has the proper formatting for the camera it's being used in. Okay, so I've got the folders created, everything is organized, the footage is on the working drive. What's next? The next thing I do after copying all the footage over is I move down to this program that's in the tray here. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that name, so I'm just going to call it Backup. It's a great little program. It does everything I want it to do, nothing I don't, and it was inexpensive. It was $20, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on there and select Backup Everything. Now again, this is what I'm doing, and I'm on Windows. You may edit on a Mac. Doesn't matter. What I'm demonstrating here is a process. Now if we look at the jobs, we'll see that what this is doing is it's copying over or backing up the contents of the working drive and the render drives. Backing up the render drive really isn't necessary, but I do this just because. And everything is backed up to the external USB backup drive. And the nice thing about this program is that it also keeps deleted items for a specified period of time. So if something is deleted off the working drive, it'll still be on the backup drive for 2 weeks in my case. Now when I'm working on a project, editing a video in Premiere, I will periodically click on the backup icon and select Back Everything Up. And I also have it set to automatically back up at midnight, just in case I forget. You can set it to back up continuously or more often, but I want to try to avoid having it trying to back up when I'm working on things. And that's basically it. It's by no means perfect, but it's probably good enough for what I'm doing. All of my footage exists on 2 separate drives, and if I really wanted to be careful, I would just leave the SD card alone until I was absolutely sure I didn't need the footage. And if you really wanted to be safe, you could also take that backup drive or another external drive, back your footage up to that, and then take it offline, unplug it, and store it in another completely separate physical location. But again, for what I'm doing, I think this process is good enough. Now when I'm done with the project, I use the project manager in Premiere to copy the project to another folder on the working drive, but I exclude any unused clips. Then that folder is copied over to my Synology NAS, which, along with having a redundant array of disks, is also backed up to the cloud. Now, let me touch on that briefly. NAS, meaning Network Attached Storage, is basically a box. It's a computer that is dedicated to housing disks, hard drives, and making those drives available on the network. The NAS I currently use has 4 disks, and I have them configured in a RAID 5 or whatever Synology's equivalent of that is. So if any one of those drives fail, the data remains safe. But this is not in and of itself a backup. RAID setups can fail in a number of ways that don't include the failure of disks. That's why I have my Synology set up to back up select contents to the cloud. Now I use Code 42, but there are many services out there and some that even work natively with Synology and other NAS vendors. The point is, if you use a NAS, you need to back up that NAS one way or the other. Having the NAS itself is not a backup. So why don't I just copy everything to the NAS? No, because I don't want to edit video from the NAS. It would work, but it's generally probably too slow. And also backing up to the cloud takes time, whereas backing up footage to an external drive is, for all intents and purposes, instant. And also I don't want to fill the NAS up with a bunch of raw footage. I think of and use my NAS as an archive, not active storage. So again, the thing to take away is that you need a process. A way to do things that helps ensure that things can't get lost. Now I'm editing on a desktop, so it's easy to have drives sitting ready to use, but the basic process can be adapted if you're using a laptop. On a laptop, because of the limited storage space on your main hard drive, you may be using an external drive to edit from. In that case, I'd simply get another external drive, and when you have footage to copy from an SD card, I'd first copy it to my working external drive and then to the backup external drive. It's maybe a little bit more work, but it'll help you in case your primary drive fails. But one thing to note is that external drives lead a very tough life. They get banged around, dropped, and are typically in enclosures that don't provide adequate cooling. If you rely on an external drive to edit from, I'd suggest that you invest in a quality enclosure and really nail your backup process. Of course, you could really get extreme, and if your footage is really important, it may call for a more extreme process. But this is a basic process, and having the footage in at least 2 separate places is orders of magnitude better than having it on one drive. Now, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, leave them below, and I'll try my best to answer them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and be sure and subscribe. Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.